So good evening, everybody. My name is Tamar Russell Brown from Gallery Sitka in Shirley, Massachusetts. And we have a end of summer, late summer show that we put on called Harvest, which was an online show, and we had it juried. We had 3 wonderful women jury the show for us. And the entire show is on our website, which is gallerysitka.com. Right at the top, there's a little tab that says Harvest. And there you can see all of the work. And one by one, we've been going through the different women that are in the show and doing interviews with them. So tonight we have with us Marika Hahn. I want to always pronounce your name like as if you're from Eastern Europe. How do you pronounce?
Marika with an R.
Marika. Marika.
It's okay, you made me exotic, that's fine.
It's so fun, I love it. So Marika Hahn. And we're going to talk to her this evening a little bit about her work. She is an illustrator. So you're the first illustrator we've ever had on our, in anything to do with our gallery, really. We have a design studio. We do design work. So occasionally some illustration work might filter in there. But in terms of the art gallery, this is the first illustration work we've ever had. So I thought, first of all, maybe I could just ask you to explain to the public what illustration is for people who don't know.
Sure. Illustration implies commercial use, whereas a fine artist may look at a canvas and paint from the heart. We are more object driven. I've worked for Bloomingdale's, I've worked for cosmetic companies, I've done food illustration, a lot of cookbooks and food illustration. So it has a more commercial look to it. In fact, I teach a watercolor Zoom class, and it's called Watercolor and Illustration, because the fruits and the vegetables and flowers that I paint have a clean graphic look to them. Although there's a lot of wet and there's dry brushing, all the normal techniques that you would teach with watercolor. The people that take my class, we think as a whole, how will it sit on the paper? Where will the eye be drawn into it? It's just more, there's quite a bit of graphics involved. And I often do watercolor lettering on pieces. So that's watercolor. Watercolor and illustration. A lot of people think it's not as artistic to be an illustrator, but I think it's great to be an illustrator. I think there's not a competition between fine artists and illustrators. I have 2 grown children who are both artists, and my daughter is an illustrator. My son is a painter. So it's, you know, it's all the arts. It's all to be celebrated.
You keep it in the family that way.
It's a family of musicians and artists, yeah.
That's really wonderful. Well, I actually think, I think, got fuzzy on the connection there. I'm so sorry. I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later, because I'm very interested in just illustration in general and commercial art, because we haven't had that conversation at all. So you're the first one, so this is really exciting. So I wanted to maybe start with a little bit about your background. We could actually talk about your history, where you're from, and your education, if you want to maybe walk us through what got you to where you are today.
Sure. I'm a New Yorker from the very beginning. I lived in the suburbs when I was a young child, and the thing I loved to do most was to draw and to paint. And there was nobody in my family that ever made art, so they didn't know what planet I fell from, but I just loved making art. Through the years, going into even junior high school, they offered major in art. I took it. High school, major in art, I took it. Theater design, I did costumes, and I illustrated the playbill. Then when it came time for school and people were talking about general education, I had a lot of friends that were going to be teachers, and they said, did you want to be an art teacher? And I said, nope, I want to be an illustrator. I knew it was illustration and not fine art. And I do a lot of figurative work, and I love designing clothing. So for me, it was easy. It was between Fashion Institute of Technology, where I would major in fashion illustration, or the School of Visual Arts, which had more of a fine art approach. So I graduated from FIT. I have a BFA And then I went to the School of Visual Arts and studied children's book illustration,
That's
which
amazing.
I loved doing. And I turned the love of doing babies and children into working in advertising. And I had a Huggies account and a Pampers account, of course, not at the same time. And then I did the cover, I did the interiors for 2 Workman books called the What to Expect series, which a lot of people, when they have kids, I did What to Expect the first year, the inside illustrations, and What to Expect the toddler years. So I turned my love of painting babies and children into books. And I loved painting and drawing foods. And I did the Ballantine book, Diet for a Small Planet, which is probably 30 or 40 years old. I don't even know. It was my very first job out of school. I started working in publishing, freelance, while I had a staff job. I couldn't afford to be a freelance artist. So after school, FIT had a work-study component, and someone who needed a fashion illustrator picked me up. And so while I was in school, I got to work at an advertising agency doing fashion illustration. And then after FIT, after graduation from there, I went back to the agency and worked there while going to the School of Visual Arts at night and freelancing. So, all at once. I did it all at once.
It's so much. It really is. So I want
It's
to
a lot.
bit about I actually want to ask about the fashion illustration, because this is interesting and we haven't really talked about this. My first so when I was young, I took art. So my school didn't have art. I'm from the South. And so we took it privately with anyone that my father bumped into who was a fine artist in Nashville. And there was an older man that he knew that was a fine artist, illustrator in a way. He was a painter, but for work, he did fashion illustration. And so that was when you took a class in drawing with him, that was some of the things that he taught us how to do. And I think, can you talk a little bit about what fashion illustration was? I think maybe it's changed some. Is that true to say?
Not really. My daughter is a fashion illustrator and works for Vogue, and she works for companies in Japan. It's not all that much different than it was when I was a fashion illustrator, and except for the fact that she does everything online. She photoshops, she sends things digitally. I mean, when I worked in Manhattan, I would finish an illustration, call the client, they would send a messenger. There was nothing digital. So that's a big change. But the actual drawing, it's more of where you went to school and what's your background. At FIT, we had to learn anatomy. We did life drawing from nude models. We had to learn the action, origin, and insertion, all the major muscle groups in the body, which you don't remember the name of the muscle, but you understand why there's a lump in the arm. And, she actually does very beautiful figurative drawings, and my background is figurative. And my son, who's a painter, really loves figurative art. So there is something about drawing figures in the family. I'm teaching a watercolor series now to a group of participants that they take vegetables, fruits, flowers, fish. We learn how to paint koi. And I also have a class in fashion illustration.
Wow.
So we do figures, and they don't have anatomy. It's a simple way that you can, I just say, have a 12-inch ruler with you when you take this class, because it's the number of heads in a body. Like from here to your chin is one head, and then to the center of your chest is the second. The waist comes at 3. The knees come between 5 and 6. So you just grid out 12 inches, and and in 2.5 hours, you're drawing a figure.
That's really
it's a little simplified, but then if they like it, they can do more with me. But that's an introduction to it.
That's excellent. No, that's a really good basis, right, for learning to draw, is starting with the simple.
Yeah, well, also, if you like to make clothing, I don't sew, so I knew I couldn't be. I love to design clothing, but I didn't want to learn how to sew. So that was it for design for me. But if you are a fashion designer, you have to learn to translate your ideas visually. So you do have to do a simple fashion figure. And that's really all that they'll get from me with a ruler and 2.5 hours. I mean, they'll get a simple figure, but it's enough to get started with. If they like to sew or design clothing, they have something to start with.
It's really quite interesting, really interesting. So how did you go from doing that type of illustration to the type that you submitted to the show, which is fruit? Or did you always do this type of work?
I have a visceral reaction to food. I taught vegetarian cookery at the JCC in Manhattan. I go shopping for fruits and vegetables, and I think that fruits and vegetables are all of those things when I teach. And I did, here, I'll show you. This was a little eggplant study that got done 2 weeks ago in my class. And another little scrap of paper that got an eggplant or something on it. I think of fruits and vegetables as being so beautiful as a flower, as beautiful as a piece of fabric, you know, rendering a plaid. I teach people how to do fabric painting. So they're beautiful. And I actually taught cooking in Manhattan at a school called the Bank Street School for Children. And when the children had downtime, this is an after-school program, I had them drawing the fruits and vegetables, and then we would cut out each little piece and we would paste them around the printed recipe that I had brought in. So they all went home with cookbooks. So cooking it, eating it, painting it is all really important to me. That's why when you say harvest, it's exciting to me. This time of year, a farmer's market, even in New York, we have farmers markets, beautiful farmers markets. People travel so far and wide to come here that I'm really happy.
Our connection is,
the market is.
Sorry, go ahead. Our connection isn't, I don't know if
it's, and people are going home with not as many. It's a good deal. Computer.
I sort of lost your connection. It's not super strong. I don't know if it's me or if it's you, and I apologize.
No, that's okay. I'm going to set up. Yeah, the connection is unstable. So my friend is going to set up another computer. Let's see.
Maybe we can.
That one is better.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to flip my screen so that I can show the two pieces. So we'll talk a little bit more about harvest now. And I want to show everybody which images we put in the show here. And they're these two. But let's have a look at that. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. What I love doing is I illustrate recipes. So sometimes I do that custom for people that they have somebody who just has me doing gazpacho now. So all the ingredients that would go into a recipe, instead of a lot of words, it's visual. So there's an avocado on the screen, there's a lime, it's everything that goes into making guacamole. So that was a piece that I submitted.
And I think it's perfect. It's a wonderful time of year for that piece. This is the other piece. Could you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yes, I actually was teaching in my watercolor class, I was teaching peaches because it's a wonderful way to learn wet in wet, because you've got your pinks and your yellows, and when they combine and they bleed together, it's a beautiful image. So I decided I'm going to do a whole painting of just peaches turned all different ways with leaves above and below. I love vines. So I also sent you some pears that I had recently done because I wanted to do something on vines, and I don't think I sent you the eggplants also on vines. So I'm doing a series of things that grow on vines.
It's perfect for the year as well, actually.
Yes, although peaches don't grow on vines, I kind of took liberties with that one.
So this is watercolor?
Yes, everything I do is watercolor. I don't work in any other medium. I teach watercolor, I use watercolor. I love it. It's a magical medium to me.
So could you explain a little bit about how you would organize an image when you're doing watercolor? Do you do any sketching first, or you're doing all your sketching with the watercolor medium?
When I teach, I don't use pencil or sketching at all. I go directly to the paper, and I have the class follow me, which is that I use the very, very lightest color. With the peaches, I will use a very pale, pale pink or a very pale yellow to just get the outside line, because if it's very pale, you can, wet it down and get rid of it. When I'm doing an illustration like this, I do a rough on tracing paper. So I will draw things out. If I need to erase, I will erase. I get it to where I want it to be. Tape it to a light box. A light box is, there are lights behind a sheet of plexiglass, I guess. And when you illuminate the image, I put my good paper on top of the tracing paper. I see my drawing. So I'm actually painting on the light box. I'm not using a pencil ever on my finished piece. That's an illustration, not a canvas.
Really
Yeah.
interesting process. So shall I jump into some of these others? You want to tell us about them?
Sure.
Should I
Sure.
go? We'll stay with the fruit maybe. Let's do this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's another one. Clearly, you couldn't do this just off the cuff. So I had drawn everything out on tracing paper, taped the tracing paper to the light box, illuminated it. I use 140-pound cold press paper. The cold press is the bumpiness of it, and the 140-pound relates to the thickness of the paper. You can see through the paper. It's a good weight paper. It'll take a lot of water, but you can see the tracing paper underneath it when the box is illuminated. So I just did each one. This was not done on a computer where you do one tomato and then it gets duplicated 5 times. It's one piece of art.
Yeah,
It's not computer driven.
really wonderful. And this one here?
I love all those fruits, and I wanted to do a little lettering. Not watercolor lettering. I used what do you call it?
Like a calligrapher's pen?
No, I forgot. Micron. I used a micron because it has a very fine point, so I could get a nice typeface with it. And you can see the wet in wet with the peach slice. There is no white paint used when you use watercolors, so you have to think carefully. If you can see the highlights in the cherries, that's the paper coming through because you don't use white. So you do have to be a little careful.
That's incredible. So
And in the strawberry, you can see the little highlights around the seeds.
Yeah.
That area is just left dry because watercolor only goes where it's wet. So if you leave an area dry, the paint won't flow there. When you touch color, it won't flow where it's dry. So you have to really map this one out with the yellow seeds and then the red, and leave white what is going to be a highlight.
That's amazing.
Planning.
It's really serious. Especially, look at that. That's incredible.
And I work small. I'm doing a piece for somebody now that's 22 by 29. It's so, it's so unusual for me to work big, but that's what she wanted. So that's what I'm doing.
It's beautiful. And what's this one here?
Oh, that's a poppy. And that's all the white that's showing is the paper. There's a lot of bleeding going on. You can see, what I do with that is I let all the bleeding happen, all the coloration happen. When that's dry, then I go back in with a dry brush and I add the lines so that they don't spread and bleed. That's done with a dry brush.
So that you're saying that you would let the medium bleed in here.
Yeah, everything that's pink going into the red is bleeding together. And then the lines are added after it's completely dry.
I see. And then how is this here done?
The yellow. The yellow, this is done on a light box. So I knew where my yellow was going to be. I didn't outline each one of those little ovals. I just did the basic shape as going to be yellow. And then I went in and did red in all the negative space.
It's really wonderful. And then you've got this group here.
That's to show how much I love nature. I mean, most of my work is fruits, veggies, flowers. I do animals, although you don't have too many of them.
But I love cows, frogs, fish, birds. I just love them, and I love painting them. So
And
that's a poster I made.
same process?
It's the same process, yep. You'll see with spring, the sky is bleeding
In here?
into the trees, yep. And then the foreground is pretty flat, and you can get a really flat look with watercolor. You just have to plan it out. You have to wet down a whole area, and I can get it to be flat.
That's pretty incredible. It's amazing to think that watercolor can be that versatile. It seems like such a tricky medium to me.
People often say when they come into the first class, I just want you to know this is my second watercolor class. I left the first one crying. The teacher, I just couldn't understand what she was saying with wet and wet, and I couldn't control it. And I explained that you can't always control watercolor. Sometimes there'll be an oops. And when I teach watercolor painting to children, we call it, after a book, we call it the beautiful oops. That sometimes something happens that you didn't plan, and you just make something out of it. You go with it. You can't control it 100%, which is part of the fun.
Yeah, no, I can see
Fun.
it would be fun. These certainly are fun images, but I can imagine how much work goes into making them, how much skill goes into making them what they are. This is really amazing, actually.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I'm going to stop sharing. We'll get back to you now. So could you tell us a little bit about this time of year, what you think of harvest, where you've seen harvest before, and what this time of year means to you, what it makes you think of?
Well, I mentioned to you before we started that I live in New York City, which is an odd place for somebody who loves gardening so much. But I did have the opportunity to live in Western Massachusetts in Beckett, where I had massive gardens, beautiful gardens, and I'd spend my time really in the garden, and harvest time was a combination of cooking and painting all in one day, because corn silk and corn, little kernels of corn are so beautiful to paint, and the zucchini blossoms. I grew zucchini, not so much for the zucchini, but for the blossoms, because I would stuff them and dip them in a cornmeal batter and fry them. So I love to cook. I love to see a harvest. I love the plentiful fruits and vegetables now available in markets and farmers markets. And it is just a joyful time of year to select fruits and vegetables. I mean, we've gotten so used to things coming from Mexico and California and Florida. We don't really think about what is natural. And I try to eat food. You can't always eat in season, because you would be eating, potatoes that are in cold storage come winter. So, but I do try and eat seasonal food when possible. And this time of year, the choices are massive. So it's a wonderful time to be going to farmers markets or growing your own and cooking. And if you have the ability to paint or take a class in painting, paint the fruits and vegetables and flowers that are in season now. They're just wonderful.
Yeah, they really are. They're beautiful. This is a time of year that I think is beautiful too, really special, and something we should definitely celebrate. So that's why I thought
Right.
that was a fun show to have this time of year. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about illustration, because we haven't had anyone with us who's an illustrator before, especially for young people who might be interested in going into this field. I wanted to hear maybe a little bit more about your life as an illustrator in terms of your career, and how it's been possible to have a career as an illustrator.
Well, I think for me, I mean, there are illustrators who do only illustration, but for me, for much of my life, I've been self-supporting. Or even if I'm sharing with somebody, I had to do things other than just do illustration. One of the things that happened in my life maybe 5 or 6 years ago is I connected to a wonderful woman, Robin Glazer, who runs the Creative Center. And I was looking for meaningful work, and a friend of mine got pancreatic cancer. And when I said to him, I know this is a little departure from from illustration, but it's a way of using art. And when I said to him, what can I do to help you? He said, teach me to watercolor paint. I said, okay, I can do that. So while he had chemo, I would be with him in chemo. He had a port, so he had both hands free. And I would paint with him. And then one day a woman walked into his room and said, would you like to make art? And he said, well, usually I do. I have a friend who teaches me how to paint. And he found out that she was an artist, and she was working with the Creative Center. Creative Center hires people to be hospital artists in residence. So I met the woman, I called her. She said, I really don't need anybody now, but I sent her a link to my portfolio. She liked it. I met her. And through her, I became a Creative Center hospital artist in residence at 2 hospitals in Manhattan. And until COVID, I was doing a lot of that. I was teaching watercolor painting, 2 3-hour classes a week. And I was also teaching, not necessarily teaching, but making art with people. And the art that I make is watercolor. So there are a lot of people who learned watercolor painting with me.
That's really wonderful. Like, so how does it help people, would you say, having art as something that they can do when they're going through something this traumatic? How would you say, this is really like art therapy almost, isn't it?
No, as a matter of fact, they made a point of saying we don't hire art therapists. This is not about therapy. This is about people relaxing, de-stressing. One hospital, I worked with people before or after chemo. In another hospital, I worked with people while they were having chemo. And it's a wonderful, not only a distraction, but watercolor can be really relaxing if you don't feel like you have to control every single thing. Of course, if you have cancer or any other chronic illness, you know that there are things that are out of your control. So it's almost metaphoric. And people loved it. I work with liquid watercolors or inks, and the color flows beautifully. You can just put a whoosh of water on a paper, just touch it with a brush, and the watercolors will just flow into each other. It's beautiful to see people just taking a breath. People said to me, I'm not creative. And I would say, how about if I show you something and I'll give you the painting. And so they would watch me paint it. And then invariably they would say, I think I could do that. I think I'd like to try that. So, you know, segueing back to being an illustrator, sometimes, you know, you have to think about using your art in different ways. And for me, this was, you know, it was a wonderful and a meaningful way to use my art. And I'm now, through the Creative Center, teaching watercolor online. So I'm still working with people with cancer and chronic illness and still making watercolor.
That's really,
it's great.
It is great. So can you explain for everyone the difference between commercial art and fine art? Because I feel like there is a difference, and that would be something you could answer for us probably.
Well, I think it was basically what we talked about in the beginning, and that I have an image in my head. It's commercial. Everything I think about is like graphic. It's bold. If I'm going to do a vine, I'll think, oh, I should do that in a series, or I just think of things commercially. And I don't think of it as a bad thing, because you and I talked about it. I said, oh, how about doing sketchbooks and notebooks out of my work? How about doing stationery? I mean, that's what I think about.
Yeah.
I want to, you know, be nice to have it, you know, instead of hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, I'm perfectly fine to have it on a journal and have lots of people using it every day.
I think that's the concept with graphic design too. Like illustration kind of fits into the graphic design world also, which is commercial art, right? And
sure. Absolutely.
Things that people can use or that somehow helps a product to be sold, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in order to get work, I have to show a portfolio. They have to see it as something they can buy. I'm not giving it away. I mean, I mentioned to you that I went to School of Visual Arts for children's book illustration, and then I wound up working doing all of Bloomingdale's children for the New York Times.
No kidding.
Yeah, right.
That's so,
So that was good. That was a good swap, you know. I think about how am I going to turn this love of either making pears into something, or love of painting children. What am I going to do with it? I cannot get a likeness. So I could never do portraits. That was out of the question. You have a beautiful child. Could you do a portrait of my child? Actually, no. I mean, it will look like a beautiful child, but it won't look anything like yours. So, you know, I thought about where would I go with this? And I went to advertising agencies. And so that's how I got the Pampers and the Huggies accounts. And I had a friend at school who did beautiful furniture drawings, but she never could do, like, she wasn't good at figurative stuff. She went on to become the home interiors of Bloomingdale's art director. And then she called me one day and she said, they're looking for somebody to do the children's fashion for the New York Times. And I rushed over with my portfolio. That was not, you weren't sending it digitally. You called the art director, you showed your portfolio, and he said, that's it. You know, you're gonna get our babies and kids. So
so
that was great.
yeah, that's great. So what about the illustration, the coloring book, the children's illustrations that you mentioned at the beginning? Did you end up
Oh,
with that?
I taught it. What I did is I went to school, after school programs. I mean, I've done a lot of different things, but through the after school programs, I came up with an idea. I wanted to bring stories from around the world into it. I wanted to do something multicultural. So I did stories from around the world, and I said to the children at the end, now you're going to pretend that you're doing the cover of this book. You're going to be a book illustrator. And so what do you think visually translates from this book? And of course, it had to be something that they were capable of doing. These were children from 1st to 4th grade. And we would talk about, you know, what would be a good cover? Where would you put the title? For the 1st graders, I would write the title and they would glue it on because they couldn't write the title and the author. So I would do that. For the older children, they would letter. And so they became book illustrators. And so again, I taught it with a graphic approach, but they learned all the basic things. They knew when their parents came to last class, I would say, can anybody demonstrate wet and wet, show a dry brush, show glazing, show layering. And they learned all the basic techniques of watercolor. They learned not to cry and beg for a new piece of paper if something went awry, because the rule of the class is you only get 1 sheet of paper per project. And I think it's great. You have to make something work.
That's very strict, 1 piece of paper.
Well, you know, make it work. Otherwise, these kids were in private school with a lot of tension and a lot of push to do things correctly. And I thought, as an after-school program, really, if, you know, if the color gets muddy or it runs off the paper, you know, you don't have to start again. You don't have to worry about it. You're not being graded on it. Just have fun with it. And they did. But the first time, you know, they realized they have to make it work. It's a little harsh, but they all got it. It was fun.
Sounds like you've had like a really rewarding career, I would say. Sounds like.
Yeah, I'm still going. I mean, because of COVID, I never thought I was going to teach online. I mean, I'm used to working in person, doing 3-hour classes. At the 92nd Street Y, I did a series of classes that were 5 hours a class, 5 consecutive days. So I love that. And teaching online is very different. But, you know, it's what's available now. So it works.
So if someone would like to take a class from you, how could they reach you?
I would love that. Can they reach out to you, and then I could give my email right now if that's okay with you. Otherwise, yeah, it's easy. It's my name, Marika, Marika Hahn, HAHN @gmail.com. Just send me something. Right now, I'm doing a series that ends October 15th, and then there'll be another series of watercolor plus illustration. So that would be wonderful.
What would someone need to be part of the class? Do they need to, would you help
some
them
supplies?
find supplies?
They do not need to have a background in painting. I never say you have to be an intermediate painter or an advanced painter. When people come into my class, when I'm not painting online, you can see the faces of people that have very little experience compared to somebody who's maybe been with me for 5 years. And they say, I can't do that. And I say, I know, but they've been here 5 years. My suggestion is that you sit next to the person you think is doing the best work. Don't sit next to somebody else who's never painted. And it's a supportive environment. Of course, online you're in alone, but I do have people, showing their work during a class, asking questions during a class. It's very casual. And we start with, I do a series, because you wouldn't come in after. Right now we're on our 5th class, and people at the beginning, we're just showing wet in wet, and they might do a leaf and then just touch it with water, and the water will pull the color in, and you'll see a beautiful bleed. So learning how wet does it have to be, how dry does it have to be to dry brush. That's why I like people to take a series, because it advances. And you can take one series after another, because I send reference material for every class. And then you can either print it out, or if you don't have a printer, that's fine. You just know basically what I'm going to do. And I do a demo, and then people paint, and then we show our work. And it's very relaxing, and it's skill building, but in a non-stressful environment.
That's really wonderful. Can you show us some of the ones that you had earlier? You showed me on the screen.
Oh, yeah. I mentioned that if there's a scrap of paper, I fill it up. This I did 2 weeks ago. I was teaching vegetables, so this was my demo, and I did an eggplant. When we did fruit, I did these pears. This was a demo. One more demo. Nectarines, I think, are exquisite. I just think they're so beautiful, and it's a good way to teach wet in wet, and then a little dry brush. Look, the contrast color here is dry brushed on. So that was a demo. This is part of my series on vines. Although we know that pears don't grow on vines, it kind of looks like a vine. I took a liberty, but pears are something that I love to teach painting. Here's some green pears. And the blush in the pear, that was part of a demo, and then I finished it at home, and that's dry brushing. So also, you have my website posted, right? I think. And there's one more. I have beets.
Oh, wait, show the beets. Sorry. Let me stop.
Beets.
Those are fun.
Yeah. So those are just some of the demos that I've done, and some of the things. I paint every day. I might skip a day, but it's rare that I do. I think that if you're going to take a class with somebody, you should like their work. So I would suggest, check out somebody's website. If you like it, go for it, take a class. So between the website, marikahahn.com, and my email, marikahahn@gmail.com, you can reach me.
Let's look at your website before we have a few more minutes. So before we conclude, let's go ahead and look at your website. I can pull that up.
Sure.
Where should I go? You want to direct me?
You can just pick garden and food. Yep. And you can just, if you touch any one of them, they'll get bigger. And you could go to it's a gallery, right? So this one is like seed planting. It says beets do best. So what I did is I wanted to write 1 or 2 sentences about the vegetable, and then I had to make it fit in the space, in the square.
So how do you write the text?
Yeah, I had just hand lettered it.
It's very, very straight. How did you get it so straight?
I worked on tracing paper, and I had a line. So I didn't trace the type, but I was just working on a line.
That's perfect. All right, let's see the blueberry. I love the blueberries.
And that was watercolor lettering. I love doing lettering.
No kidding, really?
And I just do it with a brush. I don't use a water brush. I have a water brush in small, medium, and large, and I've tried it, and I just prefer to work with a watercolor brush.
Is this the same concept in here, leaving the white?
Yep, everything that's white there is dry. It's just a paper showing through. There's no white paint.
It's incredible. Similar concept with the raspberries.
Yep. See, I did a trio. I think in terms of threes. I do that with planting too. I plant 1, 3, or 5, which is, I think, I didn't make that up, but that's how things look the best. And this is in Italian. Cocomero is watermelon.
Oh,
And
there.
with this one, the pink is just, was just pink, and the white is just the background paper. And then when it dried, then I put the seeds on. Because if I did the seeds, which are brown, on top of the pink, if it was wet, it would just be a running blur.
Hmm.
So you have to think about, with watercolor, if you're going to layer on your color or leave a space for it.
How is this done? This one here, the seed.
I left a space for the seed, so I did the pale yellow, and I did the color around it, trapping it, and then I went in and I just did a very, very light tan. And then I did the darker brown is washed on, and then when it dries, then I do the little dark spots. So that's again done in stages.
So there's a little bit of a process then.
Yeah. And the same thing with the lemon slice. Anything that was white where the seeds are left dry, so that when I'm washing on yellow, I leave areas dry for the seeds. Anything that's white is dry. And you learn that when you take watercolor classes. That's how you control your color. And this we talked about, that the one with all the vegetables is that it was not done on a computer where you do one image and then you duplicate it. That's a finished piece.
They're all individual.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's on one painting, but it's not like I only painted one tomato and a graphic artist, or if I was good on a computer, I could create this image. I just painted it like that.
So in other words, each tomato is its own.
Yeah.
Tomato.
Yeah, it's not duplicated because of I didn't do Photoshop. It's really one painting. Everything's on one painting.
And then there's this one.
That's the same deal. I do it as one piece of art. It's not like there's one turnip and somebody just duplicates it.
So how long would something like this take you?
Oh God, that's an old piece. I don't know. It takes a long time. I mean, I do a sketch first, and then I'm doing the finish, which is beautiful watercolor. Everybody has their own paper that they love, but I love Arches paper. I just love it. It's like a gift to watercolorists. So it takes a while to do each image. And of course, if I'm doing turnips and I've mixed the color, I do all of those at the same time. I don't know how long it takes. It took me a while to get the idea. It took me a while to get it to fit in. And then when it's done, I feel like, wow, I don't even, it was so much fun. I'm so sorry it's over. I wish I could have another line, but it's done.
It's wonderful. Oh, and then here's one with a colored background. How did you do that one?
You do the background first, but you have to leave out anything that's going to be white in there. Like the little, I don't know if you can see it, but the little peas in the pod have a little white dot in them. So you have to plan that. That's why I work on a light box.
That's incredible.
And it was the same with the poppy that you showed earlier. I worked on a light box, and all the little seeds, the anthers coming out of the center, were done after the red of the poppy was dry.
Really wonderful. And there's another one, same concept?
Same concept. Yeah, I did a whole series of those. If you ever want to do journals, you know where to go.
I know, they could be the cover, right? That's true.
Yeah.
Flower.
Yeah, water lily. Same concept. Yeah, that's the one we talked about. Is I just did a mass of yellow in shapes for the center, and then I added some green, and then I trapped it in the red, and the spaces between the centers. There's something you can use which is called resist, which I teach in a class, but I don't do it on my own work, which is like putting down glue. So if you wanted to do little seeds or something, you could do them in resist and paint right over them. They won't pick up any color. So I do that when I do birds and I have a really intricate wing. I will use resist for the wing, but I didn't need it for this, but I will do it for birds. Oh, this was for Scholastic. There was something for a kid's workbook, and they just asked me to do yogurt, fish, and the jam. And then the other thing was for a cookbook, so I just put them together.
Yeah, it's really nice. And then we're back to the beginning.
Yeah, so they're all in galleries. Nature and critters, there's animals, licensing, there's some birds, there's children. I mentioned to you, I love to do children.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, there was a time that whenever I didn't have work, I could go to a children's publisher like Scholastic, and I pretty much could get as much K through third grade as I wanted, you know, illustrating workbooks and stuff. But that's all gone now because they often use stock. Mm-hmm. Artists started selling their work to stock, and we kind of put ourselves out of business to some extent.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that just from a graphic design perspective.
And photography, yeah.
The same, yeah, photography as well.
Right. I mean, you saw that jam jar that I got paid for. Now, nobody would ever give me that. They just go to stock and pay like $25. Mm-hmm. So if we made some, fortunately, I didn't need to, I thought of it as like, do I really need to sell to stock? You know, in terms of the long run, we're going to really hurt ourselves. And I didn't, but I had friends that did. And, you know, for a while they were getting money every time somebody used it, you know, very tiny checks. So that's what happened to certain parts of illustration. But there's still, I would never discourage anybody that wants to go into it, whether it's book illustration, children's book illustration, fashion illustration. Yeah, you really do have to you have to follow your heart. I do believe that.
That's really,
my parents told me I could do that. And I encourage my children to do it. My daughter is very happy being an illustrator and a fashion illustrator. My son, who is a fine artist, has now gone back to school to get, he will be a licensed mental health counselor, but he'll make his art. He's a drummer. He does all the covers for his band. So, you know, you find your way, but it's wonderful to make art. I celebrate children making art. I'm a nana to children who love to make art. It's just wonderful to have a passion.
I absolutely agree. You can't say that enough. There's no replacement for having art in your life. It's really true. So
right.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you. This was fun. It's a walk down memory lane.
No, I love it. We'll do it again.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So my name is Tamar Russell Brown. I'm from Gallery Sitka. We're located in Shirley, Massachusetts. And previously we were showing quite a bit of art in a restaurant on the corner of 3rd and 60th in Manhattan. And that's, I believe, how we met.
Yes, that's right.
Is that right? I think we met at one of the there.
I was at the gallery. Yep.
That's right. And we have this summer put on a harvest show that's all online. And if you go to gallerysitka.com/harvest, you can see all of the work, and you can see Marika Hahn's work there as well. And tonight she was with us. This interview has been filmed and it will be live as soon as we make it into a proper video. It's also been streamed on Facebook. So if anybody would like to see it, you can certainly share this with your friends or family. And we'll be back again on Friday with another interview. And we thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you'll join us again. Thank you, Marika.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Bye.